Hi, I'm Bill Rubenstein, your SAT expert for professorate.com. Now we're going to look at long passages getting beneath the surface. You'll notice that some questions on the long passages will ask something like, the author mentions so-and-so in order to. What are these questions getting at? Well, obviously nothing stated or implied in the text. They're getting at the author's motivation for writing something a certain way. Well, it's hard to know the reasons why an author would be doing something unless we know what he's trying to say. So first, we've got to find that main point. If you know what the author is trying to get across, you can look at everything he says and figure out what the relationships must be. This is like a policeman who needs to know if the murder occurred because of a botched robbery, a mafia contract, or a love affair gone wrong. Until the motive can be understood, the evidence won't make any sense. Other questions might be phrased something like, in lines 3 through 34, the author suggests blah, blah, blah. These questions aren't asking the author's motive, they're asking about the content itself. They're closer to the main idea questions themselves, except that the information isn't being stated directly, it's being implied. When you ask a guy or girl out on a date, and they tell you they have to wash the tires on their sister's bicycle, you probably don't need me to tell you what's really going on. Inferences are something we make all the time. But remember, inferences can also be tricky. This brings up the subject of conspiracy theories again, since there's something everybody's guilty of indulging in now and again, and they tell us a lot about human psychology. After 9/11, a very popular conspiracy theory arose in France, which went something like, the US did it to themselves so they could start a war and take the oil from Saddam Hussein. It didn't hurt that at the time the French had lucrative oil contracts with Iraq, so they weren't so eager to see the situation there change. Now, what evidence did they look at? Well, 1, the presence of oil in Iraq. 2, the surveillance cameras at the Pentagon, which took sporadic photographs of the building. I believe there were 2 or 3 shots per second. Well, it just so happened that the plane that hit the Pentagon flew into frame between 2 shots. And the images only show the building blowing up. Now, a large percentage of the public in France, ready to believe a conspiracy theory that was against their oil interests perhaps, saw these images and was convinced by an inflammatory and, let's say, not so honest author that there had been no plane. His inference that it was all a fake. Of course, we know this wasn't true. There were hundreds of witnesses. But this is a conspiracy theory that's easy to disprove. But there are other conspiracy theories that are a little bit harder. And in general, they still rely on people making inferences from data. What you need to know is to avoid taking foolish positions, both in life and the SAT, we have to distinguish between inferences that lead to things that are possible, things that are likely, and things that must be so. In the case of the Pentagon theory, the fact that there was no image of a plane may not rule out the possibility that there was no plane. And it certainly doesn't prove that there was no plane. In fact, we all know there was a plane. As I said before, hundreds of eyewitnesses. So this type of inference-based conclusion is absurd, taking a small piece of evidence and running with it in a direction which is unsupportable. Remember this on the SAT. The toughest questions often hinge on this idea. By the way, the same principle applies in science. People who eat the fruit from a certain tree might appear never to get cancer, but that alone won't get you a cure. Building specific links of cause and effect is different from observing apparent relational links. Let's look at an example of this when we look at an inference question. The question may read, in the second paragraph, the author suggests that Ronald Reagan's testimony about his blanket waiver to MCA was blah, blah, blah. A, based on a solid understanding of economic conditions at the time. B, flawed because of the passage of time. C, straightforward and credible. D, exactly in keeping with his political philosophy. E, possibly dishonest. Now let's look at the text to which this question refers. When asked why he had given MCA, then the largest talent agency in Hollywood, a blanket waiver not only to represent talent, but in effect to sell them to itself, and thus in effect not only sanctioning a kind of human trafficking, while also giving his own agents an unfair, virtually monopolistic control over the American television industry, Reagan's memory lapse was remarkably similar to that he made when, years later, he was asked about his involvement in the illegal Iran-Contra affair. Long, complicated sentence. Answer choice A is not backed up by evidence in the text. B, well, while time is mentioned in the text, what is being emphasized is Reagan's memory lapse serving him in 2 awkward situations decades apart. And so B doesn't really answer the question. C is contradicted by virtually every aspect of this text, which seems to condemn Reagan as corrupt or dishonest, who did favors for power brokers in order to get his career jump-started, and may have lied under oath about key aspects of his foreign policy. D, memory lapses and political philosophy are not related enough to take this answer seriously. E, the author is comparing two cases of Mr. Reagan conveniently forgetting major decisions connected to his career, both under oath. The inference is obvious. The author believes Mr. Reagan lied. By the way, why would authors use inferences rather than direct statements? Because sometimes the strongest way to make a point is by giving the evidence directly to the reader. By letting the reader process the evidence themselves, the conclusion is that much stronger. This doesn't mean that the result is always the truth, as any clever lawyer knows. A reader needs to be careful to find out where his evidence is coming from and how much contradictory information is weeded out before the case was presented. That's why the real world is so much more complicated than the SAT. But you can see that even prepping for this test is a good preparation for the complexities of life after school. Hi, I'm Bill Rubenstein, your SAT expert for preparatory.com.